Welcome to the 5th edition of the LoJoWo Podcast. If you haven't noticed already, hopefully my voice sounds a lot better this episode than it does in previous episodes. Hopefully the quality and everything is just a lot higher. And that's just because today is actually my birthday. And for my birthday present from my mother-in-law, I actually got a nice higher quality recording mic for, doing this. So I'm very thankful for that. That is awesome. Should make this sound a lot better. I have sampled it a little bit already and it sounds way better, leaps and bounds ahead of what I have been using on my crappier gaming headset mic. I actually already did record this episode with my older mic on my headset last night, which was Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. This episode will be mostly with that still lower quality audio, sadly, but I just thought I would record a intro now because I'm still editing this episode. I thought I would record an intro with this mic just to show it off a little bit. Also, I kind of wanted to talk about the Nuggets game today, and mainly just about Michael Porter Jr. The past two games. He just had, back-to-back 30-point games. I think he had 37 and 12 last game, and today he had 30 and 15. So that's a super good sign for Michael Porter Jr. and the Nuggets, obviously. He's just been playing really well alongside Nikola Jokic, and that's something that I'm really glad to see. Hopefully, we have somewhat of a future with those guys. Once Murray and Barton and Harris come back, I think that the smart thing for Malone to do, which I doubt that he will just because of his track record with younger players, the smart thing for him to do would be to keep Michael Porter Jr. in that starting lineup and bring Barton off the bench, mainly just because, like I said before on this podcast, I think Barton's skills are best utilized as a sixth man coming off the bench, and that's not a knock on his skill set at all. It's just his specific skill set is very valuable to a second unit. Being that type of shot creator in a bench unit can be really big for a team. And also I think that Michael Porter Jr.'s skill set is just really best utilized and is really elevated by having a teammate like Nikola Jokic out there on the floor with him. I think they really just complement each other's games incredibly. And it's been working like that these past two games. They've been a great pairing together on the floor. And just on paper, too, just thinking about it, it's obvious that they would go well together. Michael Porter Jr. having the incredible floor stretching ability that he has with, his three-point shot, being a reliable catch-and-shoot spot-up threat from out there, as well as a ISO shot creator beyond the three-point line as well, and then all the stuff that he just can do off ball besides that, like cut to the basket, be a pairing in a handoff sequence, or he can even run the pick and roll with Nikola Jokic. Having a guy that is the facilitator from that center position like Nikola Jokic is, it really just elevates Michael Porter Jr.'s game to a whole nother level than it would be without a guy like that out on the floor with him. And, the same can be said with Jokic a bit too. Just having a amazing target like Michael Porter Jr. out there really elevates his game as well and just unlocks a whole new level of his facilitating ability. And so that's just a great pairing that I'd love to see more of going forward, and hopefully Michael Porter Jr. keeps his hot streak up and can lock in a bit more on the defensive end as well, because that's something that's going to be really important for him earning his playing time with a coach like Michael Malone, who's very defensive centric. I think Malone is very respectable in that way, but there's also something really special here with Michael Porter Jr., and I think that not allowing this guy to develop could be a really bad thing for our franchise. Also, I saw tonight that Greg Popovich actually said Jokic is a reincarnation of Larry Bird, which I thought was funny. It'll be funny to see whether the NBA fines him or not for that. I don't think he should be fined. I don't think coaches should be fined for stuff like that. But, the NBA has fined other coaches for very similar things. Like just last year when they fined Doc Rivers, I think like $50,000 or something ridiculous like that, for saying Kawhi is the closest thing to Jordan since Jordan, I think is the quote that he had. And the NBA fines coaches for that just because they deem that as a violation of tampering rules, because it's kind of like kissing up to a player or complimenting them just to try to get them to, want to come play for their team or something like that, is what the league is worried about with that. So coaches just usually can't say stuff like that about players that aren't on their team. But, Jokic isn't a free agent this summer, and Kawhi was literally about to become a free agent that summer when Doc Rivers said that thing, and the Clippers were obviously a heavy favorite for where he would go, and they did end up being the destination for him. So it's a bit different of a scenario, but still. Like I said before, this episode that I recorded is a lower sound quality still, just like the previous ones. So hopefully you can bear that, withstand that. But just know that episodes in the future will be on this microphone. So we'll just have a much higher quality of sonic audio aesthetic, or whatever you want to call it, appealing to the ears. So yeah, I guess I'll just let you guys go into the episode that I recorded last night.
Hello, and welcome to the 5th edition of the LoJoWo Podcast. I'm recording this episode on the night of Tuesday, August 4th. So I just got done watching the Portland and Houston game that went down to the wire. My guy Carmelo Anthony hit a huge clutch three with about 50 seconds left in the game. He had a couple big threes in the game against Memphis, which was their first game of this restart season. It's been awesome to see Carmelo show up in huge moments like he has in the past. It's also just exciting to see this Blazers squad, what they can do with all their guys healthy and back and making a push for the 8th seed in the Western Conference playoffs. They'll definitely be a very interesting team to watch if they do make it in. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today with the Western Conference playoff race. So Portland is going to be one of those teams that I touch on a little bit later. I'm just realizing now that this is actually the first time I'm recording a podcast after the NBA season started up again, so after we've had games. Opening night with a couple of my friends, I watched Jazz and Pelicans and Clippers and Lakers. And with the Jazz and Pelicans game, Alvin Gentry the medical staff there in New Orleans had a minutes restriction on Zion Williamson. I think he only played like 15 to 18 minutes, somewhere in there. Let me actually look at that. Yeah, so he only played 15 minutes. So yeah, like I said, I don't know whose decision that is to, have that minutes restriction on him. I don't know if it is Alvin Gentry or if it is the training staff, but I completely understand it. Being cautious with a guy like Zion with his build and with his history, especially recent history of injuries. It is really good and beneficial to be cautious. But at the same time, if you're New Orleans, you're trying to make a push for the playoffs right now. And you really need to take advantage of a game like this one, which is, against Utah without Bogdanovich in the restart. That's at least within the realm of possibility. I guess, all of these are technically winnable games, but that is one of the more winnable games. I guess New Orleans does have a really easy schedule, though, but this is obviously a game that I guess that you wouldn't want to just let get away from you. With that being said, I do understand the minutes restriction on Zion for all those reasons, but the thing I don't understand is when they had him playing. He played, I think, just like at the beginning of every quarter for a little bit, I think is what they had him doing. And so then they didn't have him out there, like, for the end of the game. Like, they took him out with, 8 minutes left in the game and never put him back in, which I don't know why you just wouldn't do the fourth quarter the other way around, where instead of, he's starting the fourth quarter, just, start the fourth quarter without him and let him come in at, the 6-minute mark or, 5-minute mark or something like that. I think that would have been probably a wiser decision, and I'm sure Alvin Gentry probably did want him out there. It seems kind of like it's probably someone else's decision, not just the coaches. I'm sure that it's not just Alvin Gentry that's deciding to do this, because, if it was just him and nobody else, I feel like there'd be other people in the organization that would be a little bit upset with that. I just think that Alvin Gentry wouldn't be the one to make that decision. It's probably more of a training medical staff. It could be David Griffin or somebody like that. But it was good to see that game go down to the wire, like a lot of these games have been in the bubble, which is really awesome to see. Just, close, intense, competitive games. And it was also very fitting to have Rudy Gobert score the first points in the first game back in the restart after essentially being the main cause of the shutdown in the first place. I know that Rudy Gobert didn't invent COVID or anything like that, obviously, but he, was the first player that was known to test positive and everything like that. So, he does kind of get a bit of the infamy, the blame in this situation. So it was fitting to see him score the first points in the first game and as well as, score the final points to put the game away with those 2 free throws at the end of the game. Brandon Ingram had a pretty good game. He was on fire for, some really short stretches, I would say. There were just some times, in the game where he was hitting a lot of shots. Other times in the game kind of disappeared for quite a while. I just feel like that might have been a little bit of a coaching thing too. Just not really having plays drawn up for him a lot of times when he was out there, which I feel like that could have been something that unlocked this game a little bit more for them, to continue to ride the hot hand of Brandon Ingram. Drew Holiday had a good game. Yeah, and JJ Redick had a really good game while he was in there. The team did really well while he was in there. He had quite a few really big shots. I thought that he probably should have been the one to take the final shot It looked like they had a play drawn up for him where he came off some screens and he, had a shot at the top of the key, but Brandon Ingram decided to keep it in isolation and step back for a three, which, it rimmed in and out. It was close, and, you gotta admire, like, the heart and the confidence from Brandon Ingram on that, but I kind of just wonder if that was what he was supposed to be doing or if it was supposed to go to JJ Redick. I think if I was Alvin Gentry, I probably would have been a little upset about that, but who knows with that. And on the Jazz side, Jordan Clarkson off the bench was phenomenal, like he has been all season. Just a super heat check, spark plug, scorer coming off the bench. Yeah, and Mike Conley, like I talked about in one of my previous episodes, how he's been looking really good in the scrimmages. He looked good in that first game back, so that's a good sign for Mike Conley and the Jazz. I think this starting unit of Conley, Mitchell, Ingles, O'Neal, Gobert is a really nice, cohesive unit with some chemistry. I think that is a good closing and starting five that could make some noise in the playoffs. It's just, other than Jordan Clarkson, they don't really have much coming off their bench. They only played 9 players in that game. They had Jordan Clarkson, Tony Bradley, Niang, and Emmanuel Mudiay, which I thought Ed Davis was on their team too. I'm not sure if Ed Davis is injured or if he opted out. Yeah, I have no idea about Ed Davis. I can't find anything. But, obviously I think Ed Davis is a better option than Tony Bradley coming off the bench for sure. But, if he's not available, I guess Tony Bradley is that backup center that you're going to be rolling with. So I think that, we'll see Gobert playing a lot of minutes in the playoffs. Not that Tony Bradley is awful or anything, but it's a bit of a drop-off from a guy like Gobert to Tony Bradley when, Ed Davis is a serviceable rotation player in this league. So he would actually do, I think, a pretty good job as a defensive rebounding center out there. But yeah, we'll see if Tony Bradley can step up and provide some good off-the-bench minutes for this Jazz team. But then, obviously, the Clippers and Lakers game, that went down to the wire as well. Anthony Davis looked tremendous in this game. Scoring-wise, he had a really effective, efficient night. 34 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. LeBron has had better nights. He affected the game still in a good way, rebounding and playmaking. He was missing a lot of his shots, but, he did make some crucial ones when they needed it towards the end of the game. Kyle Kuzma had a good game, and like I said with him before, it seems like he is improving his catch-and-shoot ability from the three-point line. So if he continues to keep doing that, that's going to be huge for the Lakers. Deion Waiters looked great as well. Alex Caruso had an alright game. Obviously Paul George and Kawhi had huge games as well. Paul George was just catching fire there towards the end. And I think you could kind of see, a little bit of my evaluation of them before, having Kawhi be the ISO scorer, have the ball in isolation, and Paul George being more of the spot-up catch-and-shoot threat, stretching the floor. I think they did go with that quite a few times throughout this game, and I think that worked really well. But, obviously didn't close it out the way they would like to. It was a bit of a odd, fluky play with LeBron getting the putback that, really just came off the very front of the rim. It was a hard one for, to get in position defensively to get that rebound, just the way it came off and everything like that. And then Paul George, very contested last-second shot to try to win it. This matchup is interesting. I still do think that the Lakers, I think their ceiling is a little bit higher than the Clippers, but I think Clippers are a safer pick. I think that is the verdict in my assessment of these two teams. But yeah, it was really good to see those two games go down to the wire. Two competitive, awesome games. Very entertaining. Joakim Noah played, he only played 10 minutes. From what I was watching, it seemed like he was out there a lot more than 10 minutes. But, in the episode where I talked about Bucks versus Clippers versus Lakers. With the Clippers, I talked about, if they're in a series against the Bucks in the finals, what they might want to close the game with. Try to have all floor stretchers out there. So somebody in there at 5, like JaMychal Green or Marcus Morris. And, then I also talked about, Montrezl Harrell and Zubats probably being, in those closing minutes in basically every playoff series that they're going to be in. Just because those are, they're two main guys there at the 5. I kind of forgot about Joakim Noah. I didn't even really think about how he was on this team now because they just signed him not too long ago. But with Noah, honestly, I think they kind of did pick him up for this matchup between them and the Lakers because he is a very similar guy to, like, just play style-wise to Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee. Just kind of a defensive rebound threat. I think McGee and Howard are a little bit more effective on the offensive end with their lob threat than Noah is, but So I'm guessing that's the thinking that they were going with, that Jerry West and the crew and with the Clippers were going with, picking up Joakim Noah. I don't think we'll be seeing many minutes from him in most playoff series, other than maybe against the Lakers a bit. But yeah, we'll see with that. Yeah, and also Jonathan Isaac and Jaren Jackson Jr. both having the ends of their season with some pretty bad injuries for them. Isaac tore the ACL and I think the same knee that he's been out with this whole season, and he just was able to come back from. So that's definitely really devastating to see. And then Jaren Jackson Jr. was a meniscus tear, I believe. So it'll be the end of the season for him. But, hopefully looking forward, I don't think that will be too bad of a long-lasting injury for him in the future. But that does mean that he's going to be out for the rest of this year, which is obviously a big thing for the Grizzlies. So just looking at the Western Conference playoff race, obviously right now we have Memphis Grizzlies in there at the 8th seed with a record of 32-36. And right now, after this Blazers game that just finished, we're looking at the 9th seed is Portland Trail Blazers at 31-38. 10th seed is San Antonio Spurs with a record of 29-37. 11th seed is New Orleans Pelicans with a record of 29-38. And then 12th seed is Phoenix Suns, 29-39. 13th seed are the Sacramento Kings with a record of 28-39. So yeah, a lot of teams right in the mix from game to game. This list can really jumble around a lot. With just how close they are. 13 Sacramento Kings are only 2 games back from Trailblazers, who are at the 9th spot. By the end of these seeding games, whoever is in there at the 9th spot will definitely be going into a play-in with the 8th seeded Grizzlies, just because, all they have to do is get within 4 games of that 8th seed, which I'm pretty positive one of these teams will. And I actually don't know what they do if multiple teams are within that range, if they all enter a play-in or not. That'll be interesting to see, because I kind of think they should. If at the 9 spot the Blazers are within 4 of the Grizzlies, but then at the 10 spot the Pelicans or the Spurs or the Suns are there also within 4 games, I think they should play maybe 1 game between the 9 and the 10 to decide who goes up against the Grizzlies in the double elimination play-in. Maybe would be the way to go, but I guess I've just never heard that clarified or heard that part explained. So that will be interesting to see. When the play-in does occur, it's going to be maximum of 2 games played. So they'll play a first game, and if the 8th seed wins that game, then the whole thing's over. The 9th seed lost, and the 8th seed remains the 8th seed and goes into the playoffs. But if the 8th seed loses that game, and the 9th seed wins, then they play another game in which it's winner takes all. So it'll be double elimination for that 8th seed, which, is because of the advantage that they hold being higher in the standings. They deserve, that advantage. So I do like that part. But it'll be interesting to see who actually is in here at the 8th seed when the seeding games end. It could very well still be the Grizzlies, but it is also possible that it's not. Blazers have a super hard schedule, but they've started off looking super impressive so far in the bubble. Having their full lineup back having a lot of their guys back, like Nurkic and Collins, has been huge for them so far. Having those big guys in there instead of just relying on Whiteside in at the 5, which I think will be good. I think Whiteside can still provide pretty meaningful, minutes off the bench for them. And, they have the versatility of also just sliding Collins down to center while Nurkic is out and having Carmelo in at 4. So that might be something that they do a lot too. They're obviously not all back though yet. They still have Rodney Hood out with the Achilles tear, who was great for them at the beginning of this season and also in the playoffs last season. So it hurts missing him. And then also Trevor Ariza, who's a nice veteran wing on their team that opted out of the bubble for family reasons. So they obviously miss those guys too. But having, people step up like Gary Trent Jr. has so far in this bubble, and Anthony Simons, and, some of their bench guys, just, stepping up and being, serviceable guys in this bubble so far. And they've been relying a lot on the backcourt scoring of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, as we all would assume. That's worked for them for quite a few years now, and, I think they're going to keep going to that. But, with this squad back, I think the Blazers are definitely better than any of these other teams. I would probably pick them over any of these other Western Conference teams that are in the conversation for the 8th seed. The only thing is, though, Blazers just have a really tough schedule. They face the Nuggets on Thursday, and then on Saturday they face the Clippers. And then on Sunday, the very next day, they face the Sixers. And then they've got the Mavericks, and then they finish it off with the Nets. So Nets are obviously the easy win in that scenario, but nothing's a given in this league. We just saw the Nets upset the Bucks a couple days ago, which I think the Bucks don't really care too much about these seeding games, and I don't think that would happen in a first round series if we did see those teams meet. And I think, Blazers, if they are on the fringe and they do need that game, I think they will show up for it and definitely take it. And with the Grizzlies, them losing Jaren Jackson Jr., obviously that's huge. I would probably bet on them not being in the playoffs when this is all said and done, when the seeding games are over, or when the play-in is over. I think they could definitely still be in the play-in one way or another, either being that 8 or 9 seed. But, it's definitely possible that they do, enter the play-in and they're still the 8 seed. They somehow hold on, even though they have a really hard schedule and they're missing, they're one of their best 2 players. I just see that as unlikely. And if they're going into a play-in with the Portland Trail Blazers, I just think Blazers are going to just take that with just how hard Dame has worked this season with trying to get them into playoff contention, and them finally kind of having the opportunity now to really make a push for that. I don't think they're going to give up easily at all. Spurs have been super hot so far in the bubble. Them kind of playing small ball now has been an interesting experiment. They've got a lot of really good young guards on that team, and they've kind of used this time to really develop those guys. They've been playing a lot with DeJounte Murray and Lonnie Walker and Derek White. Keldon Johnson has had a lot of minutes so far in this bubble. They've been playing a lot of minutes with Pirtle in there at center and having DeRozan play the 4, which is very interesting to see. DeMar DeRozan, his whole career has been really a 2, sometimes 3, but playing this 4 spot for the San Antonio team, I think, this lineup that they've been going with really just shows Pop's versatility and, ways that he makes adjustments all the time, trying to keep his streak alive, push for, I think, what will be his 22nd consecutive playoff appearance. So that's obviously a storyline to keep an eye on. But DeRozan, not really shooting threes very much with the San Antonio team. It has been getting the job done in a weird way. They are 2-1 so far in the bubble, and they did lose to the 76ers on Monday, which was actually a really close game, 130 to 132. All of their games have been close games so far, just like most of the games in this bubble have been. But yeah, I guess, you can never count out the Spurs and Greg Popovich. Without Aldridge going into this, I totally thought it was, a huge loss for them and that they wouldn't really be able to make a push for playoff race at all without him. But it's been interesting to see within these first 3 games that they really do seem to be very competitive and really, capable of making that push. So they're going to be interesting to watch as well. The New Orleans Pelicans were really most people's favorite pick to make the playoffs, I feel like, in this bubble and these seeding games, just because, they're young, popular team of Zion and Lonzo and Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, all those guys. And JJ Redick being the veteran that he is, never missing the playoffs so far in his career. I believe he's 13 years straight in the league making the playoffs. So that's, another storyline that people care about. And Drew Holiday being one of their leading guys. They have good pieces on this team. We haven't really seen them put it all together this season with a lot of guys missing a lot of games, especially Zion. And then also so far in this bubble with all their guys, they haven't seemed too impressive. They definitely have something started that they could make some noise with. I think obviously when you got that much talent on that team, but I think it's something just fit-wise that they're going to need to determine and fix and figure out moving forward to really make a push for this playoff spot. I'm not counting them out just yet, mainly because of how easy their schedule is coming up. Finishing out these seeding games. They do have the easiest schedule in the league, so that's something to take note of. But even though they have the easiest schedule, with these bottom 8 teams out, they don't have any necessarily guaranteed wins. They're playing a lot of games against these other teams that are in playoff contention with them in the West, and then also, the Nets, Magic, and Wizards, so it'll be interesting to see whether they play Zion more and really do make a push for this playoff spot, or what they do with that. But obviously, looking forward into the future, they're a very favorable organization, just in the talent they've acquired through the ginormous Anthony Davis trade and picks that they've had with ending up in the lottery the last several seasons. They have a good GM in David Griffin. I think the future for the Pelicans is definitely a bright one. Just not sure about their chances this season making this 8th seed. A little iffy at this point, just from what we've seen from them so far, but we'll see. It is also still early. Only played 3 games so far, I believe. So they can definitely pick it up and get adjusted to playing again, if that is the issue. So we will see. Then we have the Suns, who are super hot right now. They just won 3 games in a row. They're 3-0 in the bubble. Devin Booker has been amazing. Watched him hit a huge game winner today against the Clippers. Buzzer beater over Paul George. Very contested, really good defense. Somehow watching it though, I kind of just knew it was going in. Him just setting up in isolation, I was just had a feeling, and it did go in. And, they did win 2 really close games. I believe the same score, too. Yeah, 117 to 115 for both this Clippers game and the Mavericks game from Sunday. Both games went down to the wire. Both games were huge victories that they pulled out. The Suns will be interesting to see if they can stay hot. They do play the Pacers, Heat, Thunder, Sixers, and Mavs again, finishing out these seeding games. So, obviously going to be tough to get some more wins, but if they keep up how they've been playing now, I think they definitely can get a couple more, and we'll see what that does for them and where they end up in these standings. Then we have the Kings at 13 spot. The Kings have looked not bad coming into this restart. They are 0-3, which is huge. I think it's going to be definitely a lot of ground to make up to get back in this. I don't know if they can do it, but coming into the bubble, I thought they were definitely a good pick for somebody that could make a push for the playoff spot, just because they ended this season as one of the hottest teams in the NBA. They started off at the beginning of the season so awful and so slow just because they went through a huge coaching change just stylistically and everything. And last season they were one of the best full court offenses in the league just because of how fast that team is. Having a young team of De'Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley and even Buddy Hield and a lot of those guys are just really fast players that run in transition. Half-court offense last season was pretty atrocious compared to the rest of the league. And Luke Walton coming in as head coach over David Yeager, who they had last season, really switched up styles and decided to go with more of a half-court, slowed-down approach, which was an interesting decision from Luke Walton. I think it does help develop the young players on this team to kind of develop their game to be good at both, work on half-court offense as well as full court, which is what they're already good at. But if he's trying to win now, if this Sacramento team is trying to win now, which I picked them to be a 7 or 8 seed at the very beginning of the season just because of how impressed I was with them last season and their development, I don't think he's doing a very good job of trying to win now with that stylistic change. But they definitely were starting to get into the groove of things at the end of this season. So they were starting to see some positive change there. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see as well in this restart as well as in the future, where they go, whether they keep Luke Walton around or not, what they do stylistically moving forward. I think De'Aaron Fox's skills are best unleashed in the full court, which obviously he's going to keep doing. And, it is also a good idea to get him more experience in the half-court sets and more adept at, scoring in that kind of environment. It's good for his development as well. So, and I'm a big fan of De'Aaron Fox, really excited to see where his career goes. I think Marvin Bagley can be a solid contributor in this league. He's been injured a lot. Haven't really seen too much from him, but that'll be definitely an interesting pairing moving forward. Those two guys on this Sacramento team, they have mega floor spacing that Buddy Hield provides, and Bogdanovich is a good scorer. Bielitsa is another good floor spacer. Yeah, the Kings will be interesting to see as well. So obviously the Western Conference is really loaded. I think a lot of these teams fighting for this playoff spot in the West would easily grab the 7th or 8th spot in the East. I've kind of always been a proponent of doing the 1 through 16 seeding in the playoffs. A lot of people do really care about rivalries and stuff for the reason of you're not going to be meeting the same teams in the playoffs every year. That will happen a lot less with there being more variation in who you can meet in the playoffs. I don't know. I just kind of like the format of that, having more of a variation in playoff matchups from year to year instead of seeing the same ones every year. Both things can be interesting, but I guess I'm kind of more in favor of trying the new thing. And also, the main reason I like it is obviously because it gets these Western Conference teams that do deserve playoff spots compared to these Eastern Conference teams in there, over the Eastern Conference counterparts. So I think it would be a good idea to just basically eliminate conferences in general in the NBA. That's just something that I think would be interesting. I'm not against conferences in any way, but I just think that it makes everything a bit more interesting and a little bit more fair, with not having, this mismatch between Western Conference talent to Eastern Conference talent. Maybe a team like the Bucks, who plays Western and Eastern Conference teams the same amount, might not get as many wins as they did this season, and the Lakers might get more by playing a couple more games against those Pistons and Hawks and Cavs and Bulls and Knicks and Hornets and all those teams. I guess those are just my thoughts on that. I would be a fan of a 1-16 playoff format. At least something that they should try sometime would be nice. I think some of these teams in the West should be rewarded for, the talent that they've gathered on their team, and they shouldn't have this hard of a time trying to get into the, in the playoffs. I just think that it would make everything a little bit more fair competitively. I just feel like, with the Nets and Magic this season, and Wizards also, basically, I think all these teams, 8 through 13, Grizzlies, Blazers, Spurs, Pelicans, Suns, Kings, I think they're all better than Nets, Magic, and Wizards. I think Magic are the best, definitely, out of these three, with the rosters they do have in the bubble. But, Magic missing Isaac now, I still probably would take, Kings, Suns, Pelicans, even Grizzlies without Jaren Jackson. I think a little bit over the Orlando Magic. Definitely be a little closer. I think Magic definitely do kind of fit more into this realm of teams of talent over the Wizards and the Nets. I kind of think that these bottom seeds, it would be interesting to see these bottom seeds kind of playing a little tournament together to see who gets the 8th seed in the West and the 7th and 8th seed in the East. That would be something cool to see, but obviously not going to do that. But yeah, for this Western Conference playoff race though, my pick is the Blazers to get in there as the 8th seed when playoff time comes around. I think that is who we'll see in there just because I think they are the best team. They do have a very hard schedule, but so does the Grizzlies. I mean, everybody else does have a pretty tough schedule as well. I think the Blazers just have what it takes. They have a really nice roster. I think Damian Lillard is he's hungry. He wants a playoff spot. And I think he's going to just will his team there. That would be my pick for the 8th seed in the West. I also did want to touch on season awards too, really quick, just because I did see while I was gone on my trip that they did vote for Coach of the Year already, and voting is finalized for that. I'm not sure if there's voting finalized for any of the other awards, but I don't want to look up and check right now just because I don't want to see what the picks are for, other people, just because I don't really want my opinion swayed yet, because I want this to be, more of my opinion and prediction. But I saw that with the Coach of the Year, they did vote Billy Donovan and Mike Budenholzer as Coach of the Year, co-Coach of the Year. Which I don't know if they've ever done that before. I'll probably have to look into that, see if they have had two different Coach of the Years in the same year. But obviously both of them definitely candidates. Like even in my book, the two of the guys that I was thinking of for Coach of the Year as well. I think Billy Donovan is a really good choice, just because of how overachieving that Thunder team has been this season. I think up there with him in that regard has been, Nick Nurse and the Raptors, as well as Eric Spoelstra with the Heat. Have really been those main ones, and a little bit Brad Stevens with the Celtics a bit as well. I think all of those guys have been, worthy of shout-outs for Coach of the Year, and also going to throw in there, Frank Vogel with the Lakers and Doc Rivers with the Clippers, just because, those are obviously two of the top 3 teams in the NBA, so, there's a case to be made there. As well as Nate McMillan with the Indiana Pacers. That's another guy that I probably should have mentioned back with Billy Donovan and the overachieving groups. Just because, with the Pacers missing Oladipo this whole season, I think a lot of people did kind of count them out for the playoffs and everything. I think the Pacers have been a really good team this season in spite of them missing Oladipo and everything like that. I think the front runners I had that I was considering the most were definitely Nick Nurse and Billy Donovan and Mike Budenholzer. Probably would have been my top 3. I think I could probably throw Brad Stevens in there as well. And also, talking about overachieving groups again, Taylor Jenkins with the Memphis Grizzlies. I forgot to mention him as well. There's a lot of really overachieving teams this season, and it might sound weird for people to hear that who aren't really paying attention to the league, why there's so many teams overachieving. Part of that is because there's been a lot of teams that we weren't expecting to be as bad as they have been. And one of those is obviously the Golden State Warriors. Them missing Klay Thompson and KD this season, a lot of people kind of thought, didn't know what to think of how good of a team they would be, didn't really know where to place them. Most people, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people I was hearing at the beginning of the season were still picking them to make the playoffs, and I was actually I was really hesitant to put them in there, and I think where I did end up picking them at the beginning of the season, because I had a full predictions list of where teams would end up in the standings and everything. I think I did have them in the 8 or 9 spot in the West. But, that was obviously before Steph Curry got injured as well, and also Draymond Green missed a lot of games as well. So that was obviously not anticipated, and they were really probably the worst team in the NBA this season, If not the worst, then one of the worst, for sure. It's kind of been weird for them just taking kind of a year off this season. It's we kind of have a league this season, warrior free for 1 year, and next year a lot of them will be coming back. They'll have Steph and Clay and Dre back, as well as having top 5 lottery pick. So, and adding Andrew Wiggins to that team as well, very unique piece that they haven't had in the past. So, that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of overachieving teams this season, as well as the Trailblazers having a lot of injuries and not performing as well as people would have thought, just because of that. Spurs fell off a bit this season as well, started off a little bit slower. Kings, for sure, like I touched on before, with them really falling behind early this season. They had probably the worst start, one of the worst starts in the NBA, and they were a team that I picked to be in that, I think, 7-8 range in the West. They're 13th right now, so they're another team that had a bit of a disappointing season. In the East as well, there's the Hawks, the Pistons, the Knicks even. Some people had some hopes for them. The Bulls, the Cavs, I think, are worse than I thought they would be this season. They, not much worse. I obviously thought they weren't going to be. They were definitely going to be towards the bottom of the East, but I wasn't really predicting dead last. I thought talent-wise going into the season, Hornets were by and large the worst team in the league, just talent-wise. Somehow they ended up being a bit of a better cohesive unit than a lot of these teams below them. They ended up 10th in the East, and behind them are Bulls, Knicks, Pistons, Hawks, Cavs, which I think all of those teams have more talent on their roster than the Charlotte Hornets do. It's just in terms of fit, I guess, and somehow just being a better cohesive unit, the Hornets have pulled off more victories than those other teams. Teams like the Hawks missing a lot of guys with injuries and stuff this season as well, is one reason to point at for why they haven't performed as well. But also them being like one of the worst defensive teams in the league is a big reason as well. Knicks have good pieces. They just are awful. Like, they have good pieces, but horrible fit. They have way too much depth at the power forward spot and even kind of point guard spot, which it's a lot of depth, but they don't have a good starting point guard option really that they've really landed on. They just have a lot of different options, but they don't have a solid one that would be a good starter. But a lot of those guys I think that they do have in there, the point guard position would be perfectly fine off the bench backup point guards on most teams. They'd be fine at that, but it's just they don't have a really good starting one. And also them just having a lot of young unexperienced guys that have stuff to prove yet. But just in terms of fit and stuff, this Knicks team is really, I think, probably the worst assembled team in the league. Just there's no rhyme or reason to some of the signings and people that they have on this team. It really doesn't make much sense. But I think the Wizards were my pick to be the second worst team in the East at the beginning of the season, just because of them having literally nobody but Bradley Beal. But Bertans really emerged as one of the league's most improved players this season, and somehow they did end up in the 9th spot in the East, which was a surprise, I think, to most people. But like I said, with the Hornets, I think all those teams below them, for the most part, have more talent on the roster than the Wizards do. And you see the same type of trend even going up in the East. You see the 76ers, and they're at 6th spot, which if you just compared rosters, like looked at the talent that all these teams had on the rosters, Sixers would probably be the first in the East. I think if you compared Sixers and Bucks, I think most people would probably take the 76ers roster, just like piece by piece, But there's something wrong with the Sixers system. There has been the past several years. I think they are kind of due for a coaching change at this point. Brown has had more than enough time at the helm of this, with more than enough talent to work with. The fit of the talent has always been a thing that's been a little bit iffy. Having Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid as your two cornerstones of the franchise, both being guys that can't really space the floor in this modern era. I think you should be able to, with this roster, you should be able to have a better season than they have, especially with their road record. They were like 10-24, which is worse than the Knicks this season. So that was just awful. So I guess what I'm saying is you can see that trend at any point in the standings where a team isn't performing as well as you would think just based off their talent, but there's more stuff that goes into the team than just the talent of the roster. That being said, I think the Hornets have had the Hornets and Wizards have had a pretty successful season in terms of what they have on their roster. That was kind of a weird tangent, but that was kind of the reasons why there are a lot of those teams that performed better than you were expecting, just because a lot of these teams that you would scout just by talent really didn't do as well as you thought they would. So, that is the reason for that. But yeah, I probably would have picked Nick Nurse for Coach of the Year personally. Just in terms of, all these things added up. Just overall team success. They're the second best team in the East, third best team in the NBA. They've definitely met that criteria, as well as just being overachieving. The Bucks were expected to be the top 2 seeds in the East this season, and, they've grabbed that with the first spot. The Raptors, on the other hand, I think most people kind of pegged them in at probably around the 5th seed at the beginning of the season. They weren't really expected to do too much, but they've definitely outperformed people's expectations, as well as just outperforming their talent on the roster. They've really kind of become the modern era Spurs in a way. That is a really big thing to throw out there, a big term to throw around, trying to, compare people to the Spurs system. But looking at this roster and thinking about what these players would be if they played for other teams, I have a hard time believing most of these players would be near as productive as they are on this Raptors team if they played somewhere else, just because of their system there that Nick Nurse has built. Every guy knows their role. They just fit so well together. Everybody in there is accepting and works hard in what it is that they're put out there to do. A lot of their schemes that they run defensively, I think Nick Nurse really does bring the best out of players on the defensive end as well. Players that would have a lot more holes and weaknesses in their defensive game on other teams, Nick Nurse kind of eliminates in a way by his unique defensive schemes that he does run. He doesn't just run normal man-to-man hardly ever. He always has some weird tricks or rules up his sleeves that he throws out there in the defensive schemes, whether that's running some type of zone defense or, box and 1 or triangle and 2 and, things like that. He's kind of the wackiest coach in the NBA in terms of just trying things that nobody else does, and that's kind of what I think a lot of people admire about him. He's just kind of fearless in that way. He experiments with a lot of different things and can adjust and just, do things on the fly. So I just think his performance this season, I think that he is very deserving of a Coach of the Year award. And just personally, I would probably pick him over Budenholzer. But I definitely do see the argument for Budenholzer just because, they were a team that was on track to win 70 games. And they have a very specific system in which, they used to get it done. They outperformed their talent on their roster as well. And that is also because of the fit and system that they run. I don't think that necessarily Bucks players excel more in the Bucks system than they would elsewhere, other than Giannis, obviously, just because it's built around him. But I think as a whole, they just have pieces that they've acquired over the years that are meant to fit together. They're mainly 3-and-D pieces that fit around Giannis, is really the whole formula. That's just kind of a recipe for success. But it is something that it's very one-dimensional. And so we'll see in the playoffs whether a team can, like the Raptors, a coach like Nick Nurse or Brad Stevens, who are very known for adjusting and changing game plan on the fly, whether they can game plan against that and overcome it, like Nick Nurse and the Raptors did last season. But obviously this is a regular season award, so I do see the case for Budenholzer just in terms of team success. I think that there is something to be said about Nick Nurse, though. I think overperforming the way they have and also being able to make game plan changes and adjustments and stuff like that, I think is a very big tool to have as a coach, and I think is a huge part of his case as well. So that's why I would pick Nick Nurse personally as Coach of the Year. But yeah, I think, if I were to make a top 3 ballot, or something like that, I think I would do Nick Nurse, Billy Donovan, and Mike Budenholzer would be the 3 that I choose. With honorable mentions to all those guys that I talked about before, like Brad Stevens and Eric Spoelstra and Doc Rivers and Frank Vogel, Nate McMillan, Taylor Jenkins, a lot of good coaches in the league right now. But yeah, I think those guys do have the best cases.
Have you guys forgotten how good this microphone sounds yet? Because if you have, here's a reminder. I recorded the intro with this microphone, and just editing that was really enjoyable. Having the quality so much better than it is with that old microphone. It's so crazy how, you can't even really tell how terrible it is until you get, a really nice one like this. So I thought I would record an outro as well, because I wanted to mention that I forgot to talk about Rick Carlisle as a Coach of the Year candidate. Rick Carlisle, coach of the Mavs, had a really tremendous season. Mavs were a big surprise for a lot of people this season, having one of the best offensive ratings of all time and just really popping off this year. I think I would still keep my top 3 candidates as I listed them before, with Nick Nurse 1 and then Budenholzer and Billy Donovan as the other 2. I think I would place Rick Carlisle somewhere in the realm just outside of those 3 with Brad Stevens and Eric Spoelstra, somewhere in there. Yeah, he's had a really good season as well, and I'm a little disappointed I forgot to mention him. So I will be leaving for Orlando tomorrow. This is Friday that I'm recording this outro, Friday night. I'm leaving tomorrow morning to go to Orlando. So next week when I come back, about Thursday next week, I'll get working on another episode. I think I'm going to be talking about the rest of the season awards that I haven't got to yet. So like Sixth Man of the Year, Most Improved Player, all the rookie stuff. So rookie teams and Rookie of the Year. So yeah, I'll talk about all that stuff next episode. And then for the episode after that, I think I'm going to do Dark Horse teams and just kind of start talking about the playoffs more. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this breakdown of the Western Conference playoff race. My predictions, I'm predicting Portland Trail Blazers will be in there at the 8th seed. And another thing I actually would like to mention is the Lakers so far in this bubble have looked very interesting. They look really good some nights, and then other nights they look really awful. And I guess why I think that is because the teams they've played that have completely manhandled them, like the Thunder and also the Raptors a bit, there's a very similar trend that you can see there with, they have really quick, shifty scoring point guards or scoring guards in the backcourt on both those teams that nobody on the Lakers can guard now that Avery Bradley's gone. Caruso's really their only option, and he's not as good at guarding those quick, shifty point guards like Bradley does. Same can be said with J.R. Smith. He can be a pretty effective defender at times, but he's just not the same kind of guy that Bradley is. So that's one thing. And then they also have Gasol and Ibaka, so enough nice, savvy veteran size down there to make it hard for Anthony Davis defensively. And the Thunder, the same way, with having Chris Paul and Shea and Schroeder in the backcourt, and then having Steven Adams and Nerlens Noel in the front court, just making life hard for Anthony Davis the best they can. Those are two teams that the Lakers really, I don't think, want to play just because of their fit and style and matchup contrasted with theirs. And, another team that really comes to mind that fits that same kind of mold is the Portland Trail Blazers. Having Dame and CJ in the backcourt, and even Gary Trent Jr. now and Anthony Simons, and then having, more than enough front court size and ability in Nurkic and Collins and Whiteside. So they're very much the same type of thing, and a little bit, even scarier in the backcourt with the tandem of Dame and CJ. So if the Blazers do get in there at the 8th spot, which I am predicting they will, that will be a super interesting first round series that honestly I think could be an upset. I don't know if I would bet on the Blazers to win a 7-game series against the Lakers necessarily, but it's definitely something to look out for. I think that's definitely the matchup that the Lakers are going to want to avoid the most for a first round matchup. They're definitely going to be rooting for Memphis or New Orleans or even Phoenix. But, I think out of all those teams getting in there, I think Phoenix would be the second most, kind of like that style with scoring backcourt talent and then front court size. But definitely Portland. That would be the kryptonite for them, if there is one. So, and if they don't end up playing Portland first round, I think OKC is something to really look out for if they make it to the second round. If OKC makes it to the second round, somebody that's going to make life hard for them. So that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode. If you did, please leave a like if you're watching on YouTube, and please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're listening on Spotify, please consider following the Spotify feed. As always, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.